I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The Windsor briefing was supposed to be routine, private, and tightly controlled. Then Catherine noticed a face that did not belong. A solicitor she had never seen on the approved attendance list was already seated inside the room, carrying a closed leather case and waiting beside senior palace advisors. Catherine quietly alerted Charles. What happened next stunned everyone present. The king cancelled the entire briefing before a single formal discussion could begin. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered expecting order, not uncertainty. The Windsor briefing was a restricted royal meeting where senior family members, household officials, and trusted advisors discussed sensitive matters involving private responsibilities, estate access, and future arrangements. Every attendee was meant to be approved in advance, because even an unfamiliar legal voice could influence how a proposal was understood. William had already taken his place when Catherine leaned closer to the monarch and quietly asked the question that changed everything. Who had invited the solicitor? Catherine felt the weight of speaking immediately. She knew silence would be easier, but allowing an unexplained legal representative to remain could give an unknown proposal legitimacy simply because it was heard inside an official royal discussion. The princess kept her voice controlled, yet William noticed the tension instantly. He watched the sovereign glance toward the stranger, then toward the aides, his irritation fading into something colder when nobody answered. Charles asked for the attendance sheet. A senior aide checked it once, then again. The solicitor's name was missing. A solicitor, in plain terms, is a lawyer who advises clients on legal matters and prepares formal legal arrangements, meaning his unexplained presence was not a harmless seating mistake. The monarch placed both hands against the table and looked directly at the unfamiliar man. Nothing further, he said, would be discussed until every person inside that room had been properly identified and authorized. William remained silent as the order landed. Catherine felt relief, but it came with a deeper unease. The stranger did not argue, demand an explanation, or appear surprised. He simply closed the leather case beside him with deliberate calm and stood when instructed to leave. That reaction disturbed her more than anger would have. It suggested he understood exactly why he had come, and perhaps knew there was a chance the meeting would be stopped. Charles ordered the entire briefing cancelled, and the room cleared. The king had prevented sensitive family and estate matters from being discussed in front of someone he had never personally approved, but the cancellation created an even more dangerous question. Someone had managed to place a legal representative inside Windsor, without Catherine, William, or apparently the sovereign being properly informed. And once the doors finally closed behind that unexplained visitor, the princess discovered that his presence threatened something far more personal than palace procedure. Catherine had disrupted royal business before anyone understood what she had prevented. William quickly realized why her concern mattered. The abandoned briefing was not merely about schedules or ceremonial duties. It involved private Windsor arrangements, future responsibilities, and decisions that could shape how authority passed through the family. Charles now faced an uncomfortable truth. Someone had inserted a legal presence into a room where every voice, signature, and silence potentially carried enormous consequence. William closed the door of a small adjoining room and turned toward Catherine. He asked exactly when she had first noticed the solicitor. She answered without hesitation. It was not his face that unsettled her first, but the fact that nobody introduced him. That mattered, because restricted royal briefings depend on clear authority. A solicitor can legitimately advise on legal matters, but inside a sensitive royal meeting, everyone must know why that person is present and who approved them. Catherine felt the doubt arrive almost immediately. She wondered whether she had crossed a line by interrupting Charles in front of senior aides. The princess had become increasingly trusted in discussions where private family interests and official responsibilities overlapped. and that trust carried pressure. William understood it. He told her quietly that staying silent would have been the greater mistake. If an unknown legal proposal had been allowed into the meeting without challenge, its very presence could have made it appear approved. Charles felt something different, embarrassment turning into anger. The king knew the breach had happened under his authority, and that made every explanation from the organizing staff sound weaker. He questioned the aides responsible for the attendance list and became noticeably colder when none could immediately identify who had authorized the visitor. The monarch was no longer dealing with an awkward seating error. He was confronting a failure inside the machinery built to protect him. Catherine then learned what the solicitor had apparently carried into Windsor. The legal material concerned a proposed restructuring connected to property access and future family arrangements. That meant the stranger had not simply come to observe. He had arrived prepared to influence decisions touching the royal estate and the responsibilities that could one day fall more heavily on William and Catherine. William pressed further. The obvious senior officials denied inviting the solicitor. Charles received the same answer from more than one office. Someone lower in the chain, or someone deliberately hiding behind procedure, had created a path into the room. The discovery sharpened Catherine's unease into quiet resolve. Then she remembered something. Weeks earlier, during another royal gathering, the name of the same legal firm had appeared briefly in connection with a proposal nobody seemed eager to discuss. Catherine had noticed it then, too. At the time, the reference disappeared almost as quickly as it surfaced. Now it no longer looked insignificant. To understand why that solicitor appeared at Windsor at all, Charles and Catherine would have to return to that earlier moment, the one the household had dismissed, and the one that now looked like the true beginning of everything. Weeks earlier, the warning had been there. It came during a smaller family discussion, when a seemingly harmless proposal was raised about clarifying future access to Windsor spaces and responsibilities. Charles treated it as administrative housekeeping. Catherine did not. She noticed one name attached to the preliminary legal correspondence and questioned why an outside firm was being consulted so early. The issue disappeared from conversation, but it had never actually gone away. Charles had been delegating more work, and that made the discussion important. Windsor responsibilities were being reorganized, private access arrangements were under review, and future administrative authority had to be clearly understood before more duties passed to the next generation. An aide placed a draft agenda in front of the king, containing a request for an independent legal interpretation of future family access. In simple terms, that meant an outside lawyer would be asked to give a separate view on who could use certain royal spaces and under what authority. Catherine immediately noticed the unfamiliar firm named beside the proposal. Catherine asked why outside counsel was needed when the palace already had established legal advisors. Her question was calm, but the room changed around it. The aide answered that the suggestion was only preliminary and had not yet reached the stage of formal approval. Charles, believing the matter had already been properly checked, waved it aside and moved the meeting forward. The princess remembered the moment clearly because the agenda item was removed without discussion. At the time, she felt she had raised a concern nobody wanted to entertain. William now discovered that the concern had never truly disappeared. According to an internal access record reviewed after the cancelled briefing, someone requested updated room entry protocols shortly after that earlier planning meeting. The timing mattered. If the legal proposal had genuinely been abandoned, there should have been no reason to prepare new access arrangements connected to outside attendees. Charles reread the old agenda in silence. The king reached the line Catherine had questioned weeks before and stopped. The firm's name matched the solicitor who had later appeared inside the Windsor briefing. He set the paper down and admitted that the issue should never have been dismissed. His anger shifted inward. Catherine had identified the same weakness twice, while he had only understood its seriousness after the second warning. William felt the meaning immediately. Someone had continued preparing for that legal presence, even after the subject vanished from the official conversation. Catherine no longer saw the first meeting as an overlooked detail. It was the trigger, the moment when an unfamiliar legal route entered Windsor and quietly remained alive behind the scenes. Charles had heard enough. This time, he would not accept another explanation passed through paperwork, private notes, or careful palace language. The monarch ordered the person who approved the solicitor's entry to appear before him directly. And when that individual finally entered the room, the crisis would stop being a mystery and become a confrontation. The confrontation happened behind closed doors, with no cameras and no ceremonial politeness to soften the accusation. Charles demanded one answer. Who authorized the solicitor to enter his private briefing? The senior administrator standing opposite him initially described the matter as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Catherine remained silent until that explanation began to collapse. Then she asked one precise question. Why had the solicitor been seated before the principals themselves entered the room? Charles had summoned the official responsible for coordinating access because the breach could no longer be treated as a clerical mistake. William remained beside Catherine because both had witnessed the irregularity from the beginning. A principal, in this context, meant one of the senior royals directly involved in the meeting and responsible for the decisions being discussed. The administrator claimed the solicitor was only expected to speak if certain legal questions arose. That answer made the king colder, not calmer. Charles pressed harder. Conditional attendance still required approval, especially when outside legal counsel was entering a restricted royal meeting involving private estate arrangements and future authority. The monarch asked whether anyone had requested his consent. The administrator hesitated. That silence said enough. Catherine felt the tension tighten because the explanation now sounded less like confusion and more like someone trying to make an unauthorized decision appear routine. The administrator then made the mistake of suggesting that Catherine's concern may have made the situation look more serious than it was. William reacted instantly. The prince told him that the problem was not who noticed the solicitor, but why nobody had declared his purpose before the meeting began. Catherine said nothing, yet the future king's defense changed the balance of the room. Her judgment was no longer the issue. The hidden authorization was. Charles pushed his chair back. The king looked directly at the administrator and said, "You brought a lawyer into my room without telling me." No answer came. After several seconds, the official finally admitted that a late instruction had described the solicitor as having been cleared at household level. That phrase was supposed to mean internal approval had already been given, but when the monarch demanded the written authority behind it, the administrator could produce nothing carrying his approval. Catherine felt vindicated and deeply unsettled at the same time. The instruction had originated from an internal office that had no independent power to add outside legal counsel to such a briefing. Someone had used palace language to create the appearance of authority where none existed. Then the administrator revealed the detail that changed everything again. The solicitor had not come merely to sit quietly and answer questions. He had arrived intending to introduce a specific legal proposal during the meeting. William looked toward Catherine. Charles stopped speaking. The crisis had just moved beyond unauthorized access. The mystery was no longer about an unexplained chair at a royal table. It was about the proposal that person had been waiting to place directly in front of the king. What Charles learned next changed the nature of the entire crisis. The solicitor had not arrived simply to explain existing law. He carried a proposal concerning the formal structure of future Windsor access and the authority attached to certain family arrangements. Presented inside an official briefing, the document could have appeared to be part of the approved royal agenda. Catherine immediately understood the danger. Presence creates legitimacy, and somebody had tried to manufacture legitimacy before Charles had even agreed to listen. Charles studied the proposal with growing disbelief. Royal households regularly rely on formal legal advice when questions involve property, trusts, access rights, or administrative power, but that advice only carries weight when its purpose is openly authorized. A trust, in simple terms, is a legal arrangement controlling how property or assets are managed for particular people or purposes. That was why the solicitor's unexplained presence mattered so much. If he had spoken inside an official Windsor briefing without challenge, those listening might have assumed his proposal already carried royal approval. William reacted more sharply when he saw how directly the proposed changes touched future responsibilities. The prince understood that decisions over access and authority could affect the roles he and Catherine would eventually carry more heavily. Yet nobody had consulted them before the outside lawyer was placed in the room. Catherine felt the same insult differently. Her presence had apparently been treated as something decorative rather than meaningful, even though she had become increasingly involved in discussions shaping the family's long-term structure. Catherine reached the covering note and stopped. 2 words stood out: anticipated approval. She read them again, then quietly slid the paper toward Charles. The king took his pen, circled the phrase, and remained silent for several seconds. The wording suggested more than confidence. Someone had prepared the proposal on the assumption that the monarch's agreement could be expected before he had even heard the argument. Charles felt manipulated. The revised framework recommended documenting certain Windsor permissions before the next stage of royal transitions, effectively fixing arrangements in place while future responsibilities were still being discussed. The monarch understood the pressure immediately. If the proposal had been introduced during a crowded official briefing, rejecting it on the spot could have appeared disruptive, while delaying it might have been interpreted as partial acceptance. Someone had tried to make refusal uncomfortable. William saw the calculation too. He asked who had written the phrase, and who believed they could anticipate the sovereign's decision. Catherine watched Charles's anger settle into something colder and more dangerous: resolve. The issue was no longer a badly handled invitation. It had become a challenge to the route through which decisions reached the king. By nightfall, Charles wanted names, approvals, and the exact chain of command behind the solicitor's access. Someone had created an expectation in his name. Now he intended to trace that expectation back to its source. Within hours, the cancelled briefing began reshaping relationships inside Windsor. Access records were reviewed. Staff explanations were compared. Meetings were postponed. Charles refused to authorize any replacement briefing until the chain of responsibility was clear. Yet the deepest effect was personal. Catherine had exposed a weakness almost by accident, and William could see that the experience had unsettled her. She had walked into a royal meeting expecting routine business, and walked out wondering who inside the system could still be trusted. Charles suspended every discussion connected to the Windsor proposal, and ordered all related legal communications gathered under one review. That mattered because fragmented records could hide how the solicitor's presence had been approved, while a single review could expose who changed what and when. A private secretary, in simple terms, is a senior aide who manages sensitive correspondence, scheduling, and direct access around a royal principal. The king instructed his staff to question those responsible for invitations and room entry separately, ensuring that nobody could quietly align their explanation with someone else's. Catherine struggled with becoming the center of the controversy. She had done nothing dramatic. She had simply noticed that an unfamiliar person had entered a room where every attendee was supposed to be known. William saw how deeply that troubled her, and told the princess not to carry responsibility for a breach created by other people. He reminded her that the failure belonged to whoever manipulated the process, not to the person who finally noticed it. The records then delivered the clearest evidence yet. Shortly before the briefing, the solicitor's access request had been changed from external advisor to approved attendee. The wording was significant because the second description made his presence appear routine and fully cleared. Even more disturbing, the amendment copied language from earlier legitimate palace invitations, making the entry look authentic unless someone compared the original request with the final version. Charles read the amendment alone. The monarch removed his glasses, placed them beside the page, and told his private secretary that nobody would use his household's procedures to manufacture authority that did not exist. The betrayal was no longer theoretical. A system designed to control access had been turned into the very tool that bypassed it. Catherine sat with William after the interviews and admitted what disturbed her most. Everything had looked normal. No raised voices, no obvious warning, just one unfamiliar face, sitting where he seemed to belong. The prince answered quietly that this was exactly why her instinct mattered. She had recognized something wrong precisely because it had been made to look ordinary. Then Charles sent a message asking Catherine to meet him privately. No William, no officials, no lawyers, just the two of them. The investigation had identified the mechanism. But when Catherine entered that room alone with the king, she was about to learn the emotional reason he had cancelled the briefing so quickly. There were no secretaries, no advisors, and no legal files between them when Charles finally spoke to Catherine alone. The king admitted that his decision to cancel the briefing had not been based on proof. It had been based on trust. Catherine had noticed something his system had missed, and he believed her quickly enough to stop the meeting before understanding the full danger. For the first time since the crisis began, suspicion gave way to something steadier: mutual confidence. Charles had asked for the private meeting because he wanted the human questions separated from the institutional failure. Senior royals depend on aides, procedures, and professional advisors to control information and protect sensitive decisions. But those systems only work when someone is still willing to challenge what feels wrong. Catherine understood that responsibility now more clearly than before. She had not stopped the briefing because she possessed secret evidence. She had stopped it because one unexplained detail refused to make sense. Catherine admitted what she had not said earlier. She feared the monarch might resent being interrupted inside his own meeting, especially in front of officials who expected everything to proceed smoothly. Charles did not pretend otherwise. He told her that irritation had come first. For a few seconds, he had wondered whether the concern could wait. Then he heard the precision in her question. She was not guessing. She was asking who had authorized a man nobody had introduced. Charles then revealed something through their private conversation that explained the speed of his reaction. The solicitor's surname had triggered a memory. The king recognized it from earlier correspondence connected to the same outside legal firm, material he had previously declined to pursue. Catherine's warning therefore collided with something already sitting uneasily in his memory. That was why he had cancelled everything, rather than simply removing the stranger and continuing. "You saw the problem before I did," Charles told her. Catherine answered that she had only asked because nobody else seemed willing to. The simplicity of that response changed the mood completely. The monarch no longer saw the interruption as a challenge to his authority. He saw it as proof that authority sometimes survives because somebody close enough is willing to question the room. Charles made his decision immediately. Every future sensitive briefing involving an external participant would require direct approval from the principal royal responsible for the meeting. In plain language, that meant no outside lawyer, advisor, or specialist could enter on the strength of vague internal clearance again. Catherine had exposed the loophole. The king closed it. Catherine left reassured rather than triumphant, while Charles emerged more certain of whom he trusted. Yet the calm inside Windsor was already being overtaken by another problem. Word of the cancelled briefing had begun to spread beyond the household. Inside the castle, trust had been restored. Outside its gates, the story was about to explode. By the next morning, The private crisis had escaped the castle walls. The unusual cancellation of a Windsor briefing became headline material because royal meetings are rarely abandoned without explanation. Commentators focused on one extraordinary detail. Catherine had spotted the person whose presence triggered the king's intervention. What had been an internal question of procedure became a public story about vigilance, trust, and who now carried influence inside the monarchy. Catherine watched the coverage with growing discomfort. Palace communications had confirmed only that a scheduled briefing was cancelled, because attendance arrangements required review, while the confidential legal details remained sealed from public discussion. That limited statement mattered, because royal communications are designed to protect sensitive internal business without misleading the public. Yet the silence around the deeper issue only made broadcasters more determined to ask how an outside legal representative had entered a restricted meeting without direct approval. William noticed how quickly the story turned toward Catherine. The prince understood why. Her intervention was the one human moment the public could immediately grasp. She saw something unusual, questioned it, and the entire meeting stopped. Catherine disliked that framing because it risked turning a serious procedural failure into a personal triumph. She had never wanted applause. She wanted to know how someone had entered a room where every attendee was supposed to be authorized. Charles faced pressure to reduce her role in the official narrative, but the king refused. He argued privately that protecting appearances could not come before correcting the breach. The monarch had already ordered new verification procedures for every external advisor attending sensitive meetings. In simple terms, those procedures meant outside lawyers or specialists would now require direct confirmation of identity, purpose, and approval before entering. The announcement quietly confirmed what the public already suspected. Windsor had discovered a genuine weakness. Outside Windsor Castle, the story became impossible to contain. A small crowd gathered beneath television cameras, while newspapers were held up for live broadcasts. One front page carried Catherine's arrival at the estate, beneath 4 enormous words: "She saw him first." The phrase reduced a complicated royal crisis to one striking moment, and within hours, it dominated discussion. Catherine lowered the television volume. William told her the headline was theatrical, but the decision behind it was real. The future king reminded her that the meeting had been stopped because she noticed what everyone else accepted. She answered quietly that this was exactly what troubled her. Charles understood that public fascination would eventually fade. But one decision remained. The proposal had to be formally dealt with. The solicitor's access had to be closed, and the system that allowed both into his briefing required a final judgment. The headlines captured the shock. Only the king's final ruling could decide what the Windsor incident would actually mean. Charles ended the crisis with a decision designed to leave no ambiguity behind. The legal proposal would not return under another name, the solicitor would not be readmitted without direct authorization, and every future external advisor entering a sensitive royal briefing would require explicit approval. Yet the most important consequence was not procedural. Windsor had experienced a rare moment when hierarchy failed and observation succeeded. Catherine spoke because something felt wrong. Charles listened because trust mattered more than pride. Charles formally rejected the unauthorized route that had carried the proposal into Windsor, while keeping the door open to legitimate legal advice through approved channels. The king also introduced new briefing rules requiring direct confirmation of every outside attendee, a written explanation of why that person needed to be present, and approval from the senior royal leading the meeting. In simple terms, no external lawyer or advisor could again appear inside a sensitive discussion simply because an internal office had made the arrangement look official. Catherine refused to turn the outcome into a personal victory. When William told her that the entire crisis had changed because she noticed one unexplained person, The princess answered that she had not saved anything. She had simply asked who the man was and why nobody had introduced him. The prince understood the modesty behind those words, but he also knew the deeper truth. Her willingness to question the room had protected decisions that could have carried lasting consequences for their future responsibilities. Charles received the final internal review with far less anger than before. The documented account confirmed that no binding royal decision had been made, no authority had been transferred, and the solicitor's proposed framework never received his approval. The administrator responsible for bypassing proper clearance was removed from sensitive briefing duties. The monarch chose reform rather than turning suspicion against everyone around him. A failure had occurred, but it would not be allowed to poison every relationship inside the household. The first rescheduled Windsor briefing carried a different weight. Charles paused before sitting, checked every person present, then caught Catherine's eye and gave a small nod. The king told the room to begin. The unexplained solicitor was absent. The proposal was gone. The weakness that allowed both into the process had been closed. What looked at first like a dramatic cancellation was ultimately a test of judgment. Catherine noticed the anomaly. Charles acted before pride could interfere. William stood behind the person who raised the alarm. Windsor corrected the weakness instead of hiding it. No secret proposal survived. No unauthorized authority was granted, and no unresolved threat remained. Titles may determine who sits at the head of the table, but trust depends on who is willing to speak when something does not belong there. The monarchy emerged chastened but steadier. Catherine left with greater confidence in the careful use of her voice, while Charles finished the ordeal calmer, more deliberate, and more certain about the people he trusted. One uncomfortable question had mattered more than keeping a royal meeting on schedule, and that became the final verdict. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.